about where I'm from, what I'm coming from, and why I chose to work or seek work and get work at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So my background is in financial research, operations strategy, and eventually providing leveraged debt for business acquisitions and mergers and acquisitions. So nonprofit social work is not my field. When I moved to Germany for work, there was a pretty huge shift in my life when I had a child, a second child, and a third child, and how that impacted my work life. So there are long hours associated with investment banking, and still I was able to, my personal experience in my personal employer in Stuttgart, the bank that I worked for, I was still able to manage a work-life balance, have time for my family, not have to outsource everything, and still be able to advance in my career. And I kind of want to share with you why I thought that was possible in Stuttgart. In Germany, there is such thing as a family minister of family. So on the news, if you could imagine, next to Harry Reid and John Berner, sometimes you'll hear clips from the family minister, Jutta. And they talk about issues like early childhood learning. They talk about issues like parents going back to work, how do you manage childcare with work, the affordability of childcare, affordability of healthcare, and there's a center driving discussion about social balance, family well-being in the long term. And when I went back to work, not only was this topic in the mind of my employer in terms of, in my review, my employer says to me, hey Lily, I think it's really great how you engage here at work and still manage your family. Hey, you know, I really admire that. And acknowledging that, as well as getting support services for affordable childcare that I could go back to work just logistically. I think it's critical to understand that that's made possible by nonprofit organizations that provide the services, but more importantly, it's made possible because there's a strategic long-term center for discussion and thought about how do we manage these things as a society long-term. I was so thankful for the organization that provided the services to me that I went and I volunteered with them, and I really learned a lot about what it takes to operate a nonprofit, how strapped you are for cash, how difficult it is to just manage regular administration, something that companies have overhead for but nonprofits don't. And when we came back to the US, I made the decision that I wanted to pursue the management of nonprofits and gain understanding in this area and invest myself in the area that I thought was pretty critical. So coming back to SVCF, returning to the US, I had a little bit of reverse culture shock. We have a lot of really engaged people, a lot of really engaged, generous philanthropists and dedicated individuals that invest their time, but there's the concept of social well-being is kind of dispersed across government, nonprofits, and a vague sense of efficient markets. So there's no cohesive, thoughtful discussion where long-term family well-being is at the center. And the great works that nonprofits do, I think there needs to be a cohesion there. We don't have an MSNBC for social impact. We don't have newspapers for that. And so I've strived to find a place, a nonprofit that had a strategic initiative in organizing social initiatives and nonprofits, and that's what SVCF is. It originated in 2007 from the merger of the Peninsula Foundation, which focused on grant making in San Mateo, so the counties of Santa Mateo, and the Community Foundation of Silicon Valley, which focused on Santa Clara. At the time, both of them made their grant making to nonprofits, but the board members on both sides decided that they wanted to have a stronger impact by being strategic, so they merged, which is also not a usual thing. We have lots of mergers and acquisitions in profit, but we don't have so many mergers in the nonprofit sector at that size. And what they did was they also had a discussion with the community, 9 dialogues with the community, to try to identify what are our strategic, what can we identify as strategic issues that have a far-reaching impact. And through those discussions, they determined economic opportunity, that's accessible for a wider group of people, education, early learning education, and especially 8th to 9th grade math, that's a huge determining factor in whether or not you're able to be self-sustaining as you grow older and become an adult. Community immigration integration, because we have a lot of immigrants in the U.S. that we need to integrate them into our society. And that's a long list. Community opportunity, those are grants that are made specifically to emergency situations in the community. It's a discretionary fund that they have. And the last one is regional planning. I'm sure you can all appreciate how important regional planning is in the Bay Area regarding traffic and regarding public transportation, issues that are especially critical for lower income families that can't afford a car, can't afford the maintenance. Affordable public transportation is something that's critical. In studies it's shown something that's very critical for cities to make that leap in terms of bringing more people on board, and allowing more people to participate in innovation. And so the Silicon Valley Community Foundation does that in 3 ways. It it commissions studies along these 5 strategic initiatives to bring awareness to these issues. Second, it creates interest groups. So it interacts and it aligns nonprofits and individual donors around specific interests so that you have a dialogue and the ability to work together and think about a cohesive action as opposed to everyone doing their individual projects, or in addition to everyone doing their individual projects. And 3, it seeks to strengthen the power of philanthropy, meaning it seeks to make philanthropy more accessible, easier to understand, not such a huge leap. There are some people that want to donate, but it's, well, where do I go? What do I donate to? There's so many, and it takes time, and I got to pick up the kids, and so it's hard to integrate these thoughts. When we take a moment and think about it, it's easy to sympathize with, but in our daily lives, when we have our work and the house has to be cleaned and the laundry and the kids, it's really hard to find time to sit down and execute on those thoughts and find a nonprofit that you want to donate to or spend your time with. I know that you're all very engaged here because you're here, but for a lot of people, it's a very difficult issue to be thoughtful in how we give back to our community. And so it makes it easy for donors or for people that want to engage to either donate or find a nonprofit that they would like to engage with. And so there's a very big event that's coming up. If you could scroll down, Mike, maybe show it. It's called Silicon Valley Gives. You just scroll down, it should be. Okay.
Let me look for it.
Okay. It's called Silicon Valley Gives, and it's an event. It's just one of the many events that the organization does, but it's an event that happens on May 5th, and it's called 24 Hours of Giving. So they publicize it. The organization spends the funds to publicize it. Nonprofits from throughout Santa Clara and San Mateo come to workshops from January to April. There are workshops for nonprofits that are all free. They can come, they can set up a page describing their projects and what they do with keywords for what their projects are associated with, and those are all put into, yes, that's right, and those are all put into the SV Gives site, and through that donors can, using keywords for their interest, find nonprofits that are active or programs or that are active in that interest and directly donate or become aware that they exist or what exists. And last year, this event raised $8 million in 24 hours. Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
And Burlingame was the most generous community, the most generous zip code in the area. And donors were not only from the San Francisco Bay Area, but from throughout the country. So anyone can go and so the concept of what stands behind a project like this is a lot of nonprofits don't have the time to go fundraise. I experienced that with the nonprofit I worked for. You have usually 1 or 2 executive directors that have to do all things involved with the organization, meaning find new personnel, do the taxes, do the bookkeeping, make sure that whomever whomever was assigned to a project came to do that project. You have to wear so many hats. It's difficult to find time and finance your hours to do fundraising. And fundraising is a thoughtful process. You have to think about exactly what you're doing. How can you measure your impact to convince someone else to put their hard-earned money into your cause? And so by doing these workshops, by offering these workshops to nonprofits, SVCF gives them support in that aspect, and then through an event like this, brings a lot of focus and the attention of a broad span of people to one place, and then people can choose what they're interested in. And most people are interested in something, but getting there and having that information in front of you, that's the difficult part. And that's the strategic aspect that Silicon Valley Community Foundation brings into it, in putting that information there so it's easy. And that's one of the more important initiatives that's on right now, just because it's rolling into it. There's other initiatives that the Community Foundation also does. It does lobbying, for example. Most nonprofits are not allowed to lobby, but community foundations are. And one of the big issues that is being lobbied around right now is payday lending, which some people go, what's that? And so payday lending is, I don't know how many people are familiar with what payday lending is? Okay, enough. Yeah. Yes. And so payday lending is used primarily in very low income communities, with people that just are scraping by on less than minimum wage and a part-time job perhaps. Someone gets sick, someone has a car accident, they need to fix that car to be able to get to work. They need that advance because they just don't have the cash. And they have no one else to go to, no family, they go to payday lending. Payday lending charges interest rates of up to 400% annualized. You can imagine if you're not making money, you borrow that kind of money, it's really hard to pay it back because you needed it. It was not within your grasp in the first place. But what happens with so defenders of payday lending often say that, well, they need it. No one else is providing you money, so at least we're there, and we need to charge interest rates to cover our risk. But the thing is, these businesses are very profitable, otherwise they would be everywhere. So they're getting more than ample compensation for their risk, and the strategy is also rolling that debt over. So you owe it again next year, or you owe it again next week. And then you have a person that might be a hardworking, diligent person caught just in a really bad situation, unable to get themselves out, paying 400% a year on a small amount of money for other people, but for them, enormous amount of money. And so another activity the Community Foundation is doing is lobbying to curb. It was difficult. Most payday lending industry also has very strong lobbies, so it's also difficult to create regulations that curbs that. And so Community Foundation spends money now not only at the state level but at the county level, trying to make it less accessible, that they have to be farther apart from each other, so that it's not such an easy option. So it's a critical issue because it doesn't really solve the issue of low incomes, but it's trying to address at least the issue of exploitation of that situation. So Because it's a strategic organization and it's a very large organization, there's so many topics to cover. I can't cover all of them, but I just want to give you an idea for what kind of issues we address, and more importantly, how we address them. And it's important to be strategic also, as well as boots on the ground, as well as organization. So thank you.
Thank you.
The 400% per year
Yeah.
interest on the payday loans.
Yeah.
So the organization is against that. Naturally, it's userless interest, but
Right.
there's a need there. So these folks are going, right? So is there any proposal to satisfy the needs so that people don't have to go to?
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
also a really broad issue in terms of how do you increase economic empowerment. That leads up. That's a combination of a variety of factors. One is education, first and foremost, getting access to education. A lot of neighborhoods just don't even have access to standard education levels, so substandard education levels. I think rescuing that one person that needs money, that's really hard,
Yeah.
because there's a lot. And
So it's a much
there are
broader
social
societal issue.
ventures that try to do microfinancing at more affordable levels. There's a diversity of microfinancing, but I think on a strategic level, we have to think about, well, how do we reduce this issue as generations roll over? And that's through education, that's through early childhood, the early childhood years, family services, support services.
So there's no
Yeah.
immediate answer
No,
for
there's no-
that family that is on minimum wage, for example, and they don't have a budget, so they
No.
have to borrow.
Right.
And
There's
so
no
they get worse and
immediate.
worse off, huh?
There's no immediate. I think the initiative is to use regulation to reduce those rates, at least in the meantime. That's been difficult, and I think that's why they're trying to curb the prevalence of so many individual lenders. I think the next step is to reduce those rates so that you find some sort of financing, but not such an expensive rate.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm on the board of directors of a group here in San Mateo that deals with alcohol and drug addiction, residential care, counseling and stuff. It's called Project 90. And it's a great organization, been around for a long time. But financing and that is just...
Financing?
Just getting money is just a struggle. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
So could your group
Yeah.
help us?
So, like I said, there might still be workshops available where you can send someone and you'll get, you have to check the calendar, but you can get help setting up a web page that is then put into the SB Gives site, and then on May 5th.
We have a webpage.
Right, but you need to create, I think, a compatible site that can be integrated into the system, because what the Community Foundation does is you'll see billboards, you'll see commercials, radio ads for this event, bringing attention to this event, and hopefully your cause and the interest that the amount of people that are interested in that cause can find your site and align themselves with how you're addressing that issue and help financially.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other?
So you talked about microfinance, which is possibly a good option, because Rotary clubs generally do microfinancing in third world countries, and they help out with small loans there. So that's something that Rotary has ongoing. But now I heard just at the last meeting that I went to that some clubs are starting to do microfinancing here in the United States, which makes sense.
Yeah, so there's two also very, for me, they were new concepts called mission-related investing and program-related investing. And those are investments, debt investments or equity investments that pay 1% return, but the primary purpose is some sort of social impact. So for an organization that is using entrepreneurship to address these issues, not necessarily grant making and lending, but using some sort of business concept to address these issues.
So this event on May 5th, that's not specifically for your organization?
No.
It's just everybody else can participate in the
Yeah.
fundraising?
Yeah. So our organization actually does not, to my knowledge, doesn't have that many operating programs. It has a lot of strategic programs, meaning aligning other nonprofits, bringing interest together, creating facilities so that other nonprofits can make events and get attention. So all the money that we get is distributed in some way back to other nonprofits. Some people, it's grown. Last year, 2013, it was 4.5 billion. In 2014, it was 6.3. And a lot of people think, okay, well, you have a lot of money. Can you give some to us? And what's more complicated is that a lot of donors, they bring in their money, but they set up funds, and they have some say in how that money is spent. And our primary issue, our primary concern is to bring funds into the social sector, and where we can distribute those funds to those 5 strategic initiatives. But if a donor is going to come and say, hey, I want to donate to green energy or alternative energy, we're not going to say, no, that's not part of our 5 initiatives, so you can't do that. We'll still assist them and set up a fund for them and help them process those grants. There's a vetting process, so all nonprofits that receive money from us there's due diligence to verify that what they're doing has some sort of social.
So is it fair to call your service as sort of an intermediary between givers and those who are operating a nonprofit?
Yeah. I think so. I would call it almost a marketplace, because there's no real marketplace for social venture,
Okay.
but I consider it
A market intermediary.
Yeah.
Do you work in conjunction with the Sobrato Foundation in any respect, because they're a private family deal, but huge, and they do such great work?
Yeah.
And similar work, so you guys cooperate with them, or do you joint venture?
I recently did an analysis. There's 1,600 foundations or funds that we work with. So I'm on the investments team. We help manage endowments, and we help nonprofits get access to world-class managers and get returns. So it's very likely that we work with them, but I would have to
It's not
check with our
in your
donor
area.
engagement
Yeah.
team. Another question? Any other questions?
Yes. Can you help us get signed up for this?
Do we need to help that much, Mike?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
unless you're going to do it.
Oh, it's above my pay grade.
So the best thing would be to find a member that is familiar with your programs, and to sign up for one of the workshops. So I actually got to know this organization by doing a lot of research, and then just going to the workshop just to check out how professional they were, because I was new to the area, I didn't know them. And it's a very well organized workshop, and they'll tell you exactly what needs to be done to set up a site.
Okay.
Set up a site within their site or?
Right, so they give you tips on how to formulate your programs so that it's short and compact, and then how to set it up in that site, in the Razoo site, so that people have access to it on May 5th.
What kind of role do you have in mind, Mike, for our club?
Well, if we can get signed up for Silicon Valley Gives, we can actually be targeted by someone that wants to donate to us by specific keywords. So if their keyword is miniature golf, let's say, they could donate specifically to our miniature golf tournament. Or if it's high school juniors that do community service, they could donate specifically to our High School Heroes event.
Right.
But we wouldn't have access to any of that money if we're not on there.
So it's a fundraiser.
Well, that's what they do.
Right.
They fundraise for other nonprofits.
Okay.
Like a hub,
Yeah.
central hub.
How does your organization finance its own operations?
So we have an endowment. That's one part of it. Part of it is we, when we charge, we also have support fees that we charge to donors to process the grants, to vet the nonprofits. So it's a mix between endowment and service fees
To the donors?
to the donors, to anyone
From
that,
the donor.
to anyone that.
So not the nonprofit organization? Is there a fee
From
for
the
that?
donor.
So-
For us?
So just to participate in events, I don't think so. There are nonprofits that invest their reserves with us, and then there's a percentage fee on the reserves to manage that. But in terms of SB Gives, I don't think there's any fee for participating.
Okay.
Thank
Lily,
you so much.
I'm sure there'll be some of us that have individual questions afterwards.
Sure.
Let's see, we've got a couple of things still to do. Derek, we have a bottle of wine, and Derek is going to run give the wine in a new way today.
Thank you, President Jim. Rotarians and guests, I have a new way